Hey everyone, I'm going to go through the light dependent reactions with you for photosynthesis. So I know we already talked about kind of the introduction to photosynthesis, the chemical equation. You've done your POGL, so you've got some background information. This is here to support your understanding of the light dependent reactions. I wanted to make sure that I had these learning targets for you so you know all the details that go along with photosynthesis, and you can always go back and reference this prior to taking our test to make sure you are on the same page of what is important and what is needed to be known. But we talked about the photosynthesis equation. We should know the fate of those reactants and how they end up um, being added to our products or rearranged to form our products. The leaf anatomy and chloroplast anatomy, which was focused on um, in our POGL. The photosystems, the linear electron flow, and the ATP synthase, those three I'm going to highlight in this video right now. And this Calvin cycle portion, which is the second half of the photosynthesis process, I'm going to save that for a video clip for next class. So we're focusing on how photosystems, what are photosystems, what are photosystems and how do they convert solar energy to chemical energy? We're going to talk about how there is linear versus cyclic flow of electrons throughout our light-dependent reactions and why they are important in creating ATP and ADPH in oxygen. And then we're going to talk about this really cool enzyme called ATP synthase, and that's how we get all of our ATP molecules to help drive the Calvin cycle later on in photosynthesis. So here we go. I'm just going to skip ahead because we have already covered those pieces. And those were highlighted quite a bit in the POGL. So as we talk about the light-dependent reactions or the light reactions, we're going to focus on these three circled areas. So we're going to see how the magic of photosynthesis occurs, where sunlight is going to split water, oxygen is produced, and then some important energy-rich molecules are also created during these light-dependent reactions. So the light-dependent reactions or light reactions require sunlight, and therefore we're going to be focused on the area of the thylakoid. Again, these stacks over here, because within the thylakoid, we have our chlorophyll pigments, which are going to be responsible for absorbing all the different wavelengths for light energy, right? So we're going to focus on that. This is where the light-dependent reactions occur. The stroma is where the Calvin cycle occurs, or the synthesis part of photosynthesis occurs, which I'll talk about later or on a later date. So again, here's our first learning goal is understanding what is a photosystem, and why is it important? How do we get, how is energy transferred and absorbed in a photosystem? So there's actually two. There's photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. Where are my fingers? I don't know. There they are. Photosystem 2. So yeah, photosystem 2 is actually the first photosystem in photosynthesis, but it wasn't identified until later. So that's kind of annoying. You'll be able to see that visual later on at the end of these slides, but just know that photosystem 2 comes first in the process, and then photosystem 1 comes later on. In general, what is a photosystem? It's a protein complex. So we see this big purple molecule is my photosystem here. It's a location where light is harvested or where light is absorbed. So we have our proteins and we have our pigments that are absorbed in these molecules here, or our chlorophyll molecules are going to be represented by these green spheres within the purple large blobby complex that I have here. Because it's a photosystem, right? A light system. Light or photons are going to enter in and be absorbed by those plant pigment molecules. Again, as we're looking at this, we're talking about the thylakoids and the membrane of the thylakoid. So that's what this location is. Okay. When I talk about this photosystem, we're going to focus on electrons. And we're going to talk about light. And those are the main things that we're gonna see over and over again, and how those are re-energized. We know that protein complexes, right, have their 3D folding patterns all the way up through the quaternary structure. So this is actually what a photosystem looks like, which is incredibly awesome, and kind of crazy at the same time. Um, but the little chlorophyll pigments we can kind of see are these small little areas of folding within the tubes and the spirals. So I'm going to kind of do this analogy with The Simpsons and warehouses and kind of like a rave party, so we understand what's happening with our photosystems throughout photosynthesis. Okay. And then there are going to be two areas or two routes for our electrons to flow, which are going to be responsible for transporting that energy. So there's going to be kind of a linear flow to them as they go through photosynthesis. And there's also going to be like this cyclic flow throughout the photosystems, which I'll reference as well. So photosynthesis, sorry, our light dependent reactions are going to start off with photosystem 2 and sunlight. So our photosystem starts off um, as that empty warehouse. But as soon as sunlight gets absorbed into that chlorophyll of photosystem 2, that's where the party gets started, right? So we have light entering in my big warehouse over here, or my photosystem. It's going to be absorbed by chlorophyll, and it's going to start exciting electrons. And once two electrons get excited, they're going to start bouncing around like crazy. So here's my Homer that has been excited, which is different from the previous slide, where he was, oops, sorry, that's annoying, where he was fast asleep. He was not energized. He's my electron molecule. Geez, now he's pumped up because light energy has been absorbed in the chlorophyll of his pigment molecules here. So now the two electrons are pumped up. They're in that photosystem causing a ruckus. The bouncer comes and says, hey, you have to get out of here. You have a lot of energy that is needed elsewhere. So the bouncer comes and bounces them out. And those two electrons are excited, and they're going to leave and go through the electron transport chain, the ETC. Right? So our next step, those two electrons, right, were excited. They were bounced out and had to leave to the electron transport chain. So now we have to replace those two electrons. And in order to do that, right, we need, again, sunlight to pop in, split up that water molecule. That was what our reactant to enter into that photosystem. And it's going to split that water molecule and release a couple things. So the two new electrons to replace the ones that were lost. We're going to have two hydrogen ions, the H's from our water molecule, and then oxygen gas is also going to be released from that water molecule. So water is split, releases electrons, hydrogen ions, and oxygen. And that makes the photosystem 2 stable again. So again, here's our empty warehouse where it was missing the electrons after they got bounced out. So no energy, no light. Then water enters in, light enters in, and then releases these three. So those two initial electrons that were excited then got bounced out and were sent to this electron transport chain, the ETC. What is the electron transport chain? Well, it's obviously going to transport electrons, but it's going to start off by causing those negatively charged electrons to move down that chain. It's going to interact with that protein complex itself, and it's going to um, cause the release of some positively charged hydrogen ions as well. So that's going to flow towards that protein, and it's going to cause ATP to be released during that electron transport chain as well. So a little bit of ATP gets released here. So again, those two excited electrons, they're going to move down the electron transport chain and interact with those proteins. The The proteins are going to become negatively charged, so the electrons are dropping off their energy to those proteins. So here's angry grandpa over here. That's the ETC. The electrons are pumped up. They drop off their energy. And now we have some positively charged proteins, which leads to the positively charged hydrogen ions. Okay. Those two electrons, right, they dropped off their energy as they traveled through that electron transport chain. So here's our electrons. They have lost their energy. They're going to enter into photosystem 1, right? Photosystem 1 was identified first, but is actually later in the process. Okay, here's our photosystem. They need to be replaced again in that photosystem. So more sunlight is going to enter into the photosystem. Sunlight, party, party, party. Electrons become re-energized, and they will be able to leave this photosystem and then head back towards photosystem 2 as a cyclic process for those electrons. Right, so all about the photosystems and how they re-energize and replace that electron energy. Okay. After that photosystem has gone through and re-energized the electrons, those electrons are going to be captured and utilized in order to form an energy-rich molecule called NADPH. And that's very similar to ATP. So I've got officer here capturing the electrons and then going to pass them along to form NADPH. So here's the capturing of those excited electrons. They're going to bond it up and create that energy-rich molecule. And that energy-rich molecule is going to help drive the second portion of photosynthesis, which is called the Calvin cycle. And that's how sugar is made. So it needs energy to make sugar with those electrons. Now, how do we make ATP? ATP is an important molecule for all of cellular processes. It goes through a process called chemiosmosis. We break that down. The chemi part is like chemicals. The osmosis we are aware of. We talk about osmosis like being the movement of water. We know osmosis is from high concentration to low concentration, right? So what happens during chemiosmosis is that the chemical hydrogen ions are going to move from high concentration to low concentration through this really cool molecule called an ATP synthase enzyme. And as these hydrogen ions start flowing through that ATP synthase, it's going to start generating a lot of energy, which will then be transported into a molecule known as ATP. So here's my lineup of those hydrogen ions that are going to fight and pile through this ATP synthase enzyme from high concentration to low concentration. Another look at that, high concentration here, pumping through the ATP synthase, which is like really this cool ATP synthase enzyme that looks like a turbine. And it's just going to pump them on through. Phosphate attaches with it. And that's how we get our ATP molecule. But lots of energy is being generated here. And that ATP and then that NADPH from the previous step, those two molecules will then go on to the Calvin cycle to generate some sugar. So again, here's the like scientific image that goes through our step for the light dependent reactions. We're starting in photosystem 1 over here. Light enters, energizes our 2 electron molecules. So those are energized. Okay, those are going to go through photosystem 2. Okay, they have so much energy that they have to be bounced out and passed along to the electron transport chain. So they get kicked out. Those 2 chlorophyll electron molecules then have to be replaced. So in comes water, right? Our reactant comes in. Light is going to split that water molecule. So 2 new electron energy electrons are going to be replacing the ones that left. Here comes our oxygen out of that water molecule. And then some hydrogen ions are released during that process too. So the hydrogen ions and our two energy-rich electrons that go down the electron transport chain over here, they're going to drop off their energy as they pass through the electron chain. Those hydrogen ions are also going to be utilized in that process. And those electrons enter into photosystem 1. They lost their energy because they passed it off during that electron transport chain. So light has to come back in and re-energize those electrons and replace them. And then those electrons can then leave and then cycle back into photosystem 2 if they want to. Or they can just, hang out in here to be re-energized by light energy. So the electrons are energized again. They're going to leave and they're going to go through that ATP synthase process, and they're also going to help form NADPH. So our energy-rich molecules are going to be formed. Okay, so it's all about light replacing the electrons that that pass their energy on throughout this entire process, and all that energy that gets built up turns into our very important ATP molecules and NADPH molecules. So that is the basics of the light-dependent reactions. Again, here's our balanced equation for photosynthesis that we should be well aware of. And again, light-dependent reactions use light, the chlorophyll molecules, they take water and split it, and oxygen is released. And then the Calvin cycle is going to focus on the carbon dioxide and the sugar. So again, here's that breakdown of the 5 steps of the light-dependent reactions to really give you, hammer it home on Homer, on how the light-dependent reactions occur. So, and a reminder that these notes are also on Google Classroom, so you can go through them at your own pace. All right. And then, yep, I just wanted to make sure I didn't have one other picture in there for you. But that's the end of that.